So 8 weeks ago, a user wrote a comment to my binding basics tutorial asking if I could make a video. As far as I had understood, the user wanted two things. One, change the value of data grid cells by binding to a text box like in Excel. Two, make the data grid row red when the text box has a negative value like quoting -$2. Because at that time I thought that I would make just one more video for the timer series, I replied, I can, but only after I finish the current series, so in about 4 weeks. But after I had made a new episode of the timer series, I realized that I actually would need 3 more videos to bring the timer project to the final and complete look. So it actually took me twice as long to finally finish the timer series. And here we are, ready to apply binding to a data grid and help the user. So let's start by installing a very useful NuGet package. So go to Solution, right click on it, and select Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. And here select Browse, and in the search type 4D, and we need property change.4d. So select your project and click install. Accept the license. Once it is installed, it also installs 4D, but not the latest version, so let's update it to the latest one. So let's select latest table and click install. Again, accept the license, and sometimes it fails, so just click restart in the upper right. So in order to have some data in our data grid, we will need to create a new class with a couple of properties. So right click on it and select add and new class. I'll name it customer. It will have a few properties that are going to be dynamically changed through the text box. So we need to derive this class from iNotify property changed. Press Ctrl dot and include the missing using. We need to make this class public. So this interface requires its implementation. So Ctrl dot and hit enter. And I just usually repeat what Angel6 did. So type enter, open braces, sender, e, close braces, then open close curly braces. And let's leave a summary here. So the event that is fired when any child property changes its value. Again, the description is taken from the Angel6 basic view model. Now, in order to call this event, we need a method. So public void, and let's call it on property changed. Changed. It will accept a string parameter. Let's call it name. And we just access our event here, property changed, and in braces type this, and then u, property changed event args, and in braces type name. And let's leave a summary here as well. Call this to fire let's reference it, property changed event, and the name is the name of the property. Okay, let's move on to its properties. We will create just 2 sample properties, so make them public, for example string, and any name, for example name, getter and setter. So now let me briefly explain why we installed 4D property changed. Without it, you would need to create a field for every public property that is going to be changed, typically with a similar name, and in order to get it, you would return this private field, and in order to set it, you would set this private field to the value passed to this property. And when you set it, you would also need to notify that this property is changed by calling this method like this. So on property changed, and here you type the name of your property, either like this, or a bit smarter, using name of and the property name. And 4D property changed automatically does it all if you derive it from iNotify property changed. So you no longer need to type any of this, you can just leave them empty and reduce it all to one line. Now let's leave a summary that this is just a sample property, and let's create another one for money, for example money spent. But we also need one mandatory property, and that is we need to check if the current class instance is selected. So public bool is item selected, and again getter and setter. So let's leave a real summary here. So indicates if this class instance is selected. We will need it to notify the row that the item it is associated with is selected. Now we can close it and return to the main window. Let's add an outer margin here. So grid and margin, for example, 5. Now let's change the grid structure. So the first row height will be auto and the second one as well, because there will be our text box to change data grid cells, and we will need another row definition for the data grid itself, like this. So this is just a leftover from our binding basics tutorial. We will leave it as it is. I will just specify that it is in row 0, and here in row 1 we will create another grid for a text block and a text box. So let's create a grid. In grid row 1 it will consist of 2 columns. The left one will be of auto width, so grid column definitions, column definition width auto, and the second one is going to occupy the rest of the space because there will be our text box to change data cells. Create a text block. It's not mandatory, but I would like to have some description of what this text box does. So let's type value and column. Let's also give it some margin on left and right, so 50. Next, in the right column we will have a text box, so grid column 1, and here is the most important part. In order to be able to change our data grid cells with this text box, we need its text to be bound. So text, open curly braces, type binding, and we will bind to a property that does not exist yet, but we will create it later. This is going to be one of the properties of our current customer class. I will name it later current customer selected property value. And because we want it to update instantly, not on lost focus, I will specify the update source trigger and set it to property changed. And below we will have a data grid. So data grid, it will be in grid row 2, and it's absolutely necessary to set its item source. So I will have a property which I will name customers. Again, we need to update it on change, so update source trigger and set it to property changed. Here is another very important part. Data grid allows you different selection units like cells, rows, or rows and cells. And the way you can achieve data cells modification through a text box highly depends on the selected unit. As far as I understood, the user wanted it to be separate cells, so I will set selection unit to a cell, and by default the selection mode is set to be extended, and that means that you can select one or drag and select more cells, and I don't really want that. I will set selection mode to be single. Also, I will add data only from the sample data collection, so I don't need to add new rows. So I will set can user add rows to false. And again, because we will work with cell selection units, we will need to access selected cells. And this is not a bindable property, so we will need to access its selected cells changed event. Press tab to generate it and press F12. Now get back. So this should be responsible for data modification. As for coloring the row to red when the value is negative, we will need to access data grid row style. Type style and set target type to data grid row. And we will need to access its style triggers. And we will need to check two properties. First, if it is the current row, IDEST it is selected, and second, if the cell text is negative or the text box value is negative. So we will need a multi-data trigger. Type multi-data trigger, and we will type two conditions. So multi-data trigger conditions, and type condition, and we will bind to the property that we will create later in our main window.xaml.cs. So binding, open curly braces, again type binding, set relative source, open curly braces, type again relative source, and we need our window. So select ancestor type, window. Then after the first curly brace, put comma and set the path to your property. I will name it is cell text negative. I will have to create a property with such a name here. And finally, the value that we are going to check it for will be true. So if that property is true, this is the first condition. And the second condition, again, type binding, open curly braces, type binding again, and we will bind to the customer class instance associated with the current row. So binding path equals is item selected, which is the property that we already created here, is item selected. Okay, you could think that you could use a property called is selected, which each data grid row has. But because we chose selection unit cell, we cannot use it because it will always be false. So that's why we have to do it. Oh, just one equal sign. And again, we check if is item selected, value is true. So if these conditions are met, we will change the background to red. So access multi-data trigger setters, and here define a new setter for the property called background and set the value to be red. If you check it now, it won't do a thing. So we have an empty data grid, and what we type here is not actually bound right now. And that is because we have not set data context to this window yet. And again, this is just a leftover from our binding basics tutorial. It should be still working. Yeah. Okay, now let's go to our backend and make it work. So again, first of all, you derive it from iNotify property changed. Let's just copy the name from here. Okay, press Ctrl dot and hit enter. Again, it requires the interface. Well, we can just copy it from here and put it here. Now we are going to have a lot of public properties here. So define a new region, and I'll call it public properties and region. And here I will create a public property for our data collection. So public observable collection, press Ctrl dot and include it, of type customer, and we'll name it customers, as we did here. Again, it will need getter and setter because it's a property, and we will initialize it here. So new observable collection customer, open and close parentheses. Let's leave a summary here, so it will be just our data collection. Okay, and let's create a new property for the currently selected cell. Type public, then data grid cell, but not just cell. Instead use cell info. Press Ctrl dot and hit enter. Then I will type its name, like data grid selected cell, and again give it getter and setter. So let's leave a summary. Currently selected cell. And again, why we need to store it here is because selected cells property exists in the data grid, but it is not bindable. And why we need the selected cell is because when you click anywhere outside the data grid, most of its properties like current item, selected item, current cell, and so on will be just null. And the only thing that will be left storing the selection will be selected cells. And that's why we need to store it. So let's type in braces preserved despite lost focus. And we will need another property for the name of the property of a class instance inside a selected cell. So type public string current customer, oh, how did we name it? Current, oh, here, current customer selector property name. And again, why we need to store the name is because we don't know which of the cells we selected, just which column. So we need a bit of a hack to know which exactly property are we modifying here. So it will be a read-only property, just only with the setter, and it will return some value only if data grid selected cell column is not equal to null. So if it's not null, we will return the column name as a string. Oh, actually not its name, but the header. And we need to check if it's not null. But if the column was null, we will return just string empty. Now, under the region, we will need to create a private field for the customer type. So type private, read only, because we will not change it, type, press Ctrl dot and include it, and the name will be M customer type, which is just type of customer. Actually, we could just use type of customer everywhere, but I want to have a shortcut and I don't know how time-consuming this operation is. So just to be safe, I will store it as a field and reference later. And I will leave a summary here, so it will be our customer as and another reference type. So M customer type is customer as type. Now, why do we need to store this type? It's because we need the property of a class instance inside a selected cell, which will be derived from the name of the property. By the way, let's leave a summary here. The name of the property of a class instance inside a selected cell. And here, public, and then property info. Press Ctrl dot and include it. I'll name it customer property info, and it will also be read-only. It's going to be M customer type dot get property, and here we specify the name of the property that we want to get. So the property of a class instance inside a selected cell. Then we need the property for the class instance itself, which is inside a selected cell. So public customer current customer. And this one is going to be more complex. So let's leave a summary here. The class instance inside a selected cell. Again, it will be read-only, so only get. But what we need is to set the isItemSelected property of all class instances inside this customer's property to be false. Because otherwise, if we don't do it, when we click another row, the previous one is going to be still considered as selected. If both of them are negative, they both will be colored in red. And that's not what we want. So first we will loop through all customers. So for each var item in customers, so deselect each of them, or rather deselecting. Loop through all customers, deselecting each of them. So item is item selected will be equal to false. Actually, we can simplify it like this. But then we also need to get a customer class instance from the selected cell, because we need to return an object of type customer. So customer, let's name it customer, will be equal to data grid selected cell, but not itself, rather its item as customer. And then we need to check if the class instance was obtained. So if the class instance is obtained, and we do it like if customer is not null, we select it. So customer is item selected will be equal to true. And then at the end we need to return the class instance. So return customer. But that's not it. We also need another property to store the value of the property of a class instance inside a selected cell. So I will copy this name and type public object because our property could be string, int, and so on. So current customer selected property value, and it's a bit complex, but not as the current customer. So let's leave a summary here. The value of the property of a class instance inside a selected cell. So as for the getter, we will just return customer property info by checking if it's not null and getting its value. And in braces we specify the object, I just current customer. And it will be similar for setter, but we will not return it, and we will set value to the value passed to this property. And finally we need just one more public property to check if the text box has a negative value. So public bool, and we named it is cell text negative. It's a read-only property that first checks if current customer selected property value is not null, so not null, and if this value converted to string contains a minus sign. So let's leave a summary. Indicates whether the text box has a negative value. So if you look at it now, all of these properties are further used down to these two properties, which are actually what the user wanted. So that's it for our public properties. Now let's fill data collection with sample data. I just customers observable collection, and I will do it in a loop. So fill data collection with sample data. I will use a random class called rnd equals new random, and I will create a loop int I equals 0, I is less than 5, and I++. It means that we will have 5 items. So our collection customers, add new customer, and here name is going to be customer I, and money spent will be equal to rnd.next from -5 to 5, and the dollar character, again as it was written in the comment, and a semicolon. And absolutely necessary step is set data context to this window or your view model so that its properties could be bound to. So set data context to this. And the last step is we need to actually get the selected cell. So first of all, we will need to convert our sender to a data grid. So data grid called data grid will be equal to sender as data grid control. So we get the sender as a data grid, and then we need to check if at least one cell is selected. So if at least one cell is selected, so if data grid selected cells, and you see that it is get only dot count is greater than 0, then we fill the appropriate property IDEST data grid selected cell with the first selected cell. So data grid selected cell equals data grid selected cells and the first element. And now this is a working solution. Let me show you. So here is our sample data. As you see right now, our text box is empty because we have not selected any cell, but if we do it, we get its current value. and we can change it right here. This cell, and you see that our property isItemSelected is correctly set. Now, as for negative values, this one is positive, this one too, and this one is negative. And as you see, the current row gets colored in red, because we have a minus here. And if we remove it, it becomes non-red again. But because we did a very simple check with checking if it contains or not just this character, theoretically you could just type it here and it will be considered as a negative. So maybe there is a better check, but this should be enough. Now, my solution also has one significant drawback, or maybe it can be solved, but I haven't figured it out yet, and that is if you start typing it directly into the cell, its changes won't reflect here. And actually, if you leave it as it is and click somewhere outside and then back to it, you will see that now the value is again synchronized. And if you start typing here something completely different and then you start typing here, the previous changes will be lost, and that may be a problem for you. Well, that's it. I hope I could help you. If not, please leave a comment and write what you expected instead. So if this video was helpful, please subscribe and see you later.